Good morning, everybody. Can you go ahead, please, and be seated? We are going to go ahead and start the meeting. Before we start, can people at the back hear me? How about in the middle? Can you sort of wave if you can hear? Yeah? And the front? You can't hear, but everyone else is. Could we turn it up just a little? Yeah, he just turned it up a little bit. Okay, so I want to go ahead and call the meeting to order. It's so lovely to see that we're gradually getting more and more people returning to the live meetings. It's really nice to see everybody. You may wonder why there's only me up here and not my partner in crime, Susan Harris. Unfortunately, Susan managed to fracture her fibula while walking her daughter's dog over the weekend. So she will be back on form next month, but she's watching us and we should wave to her, I guess. Hi, Susan. She's at home and she's very frustrated that she can't be here, but we will manage without her just for one meeting. Updates on what's happening going forward. Obviously, we still have to be careful about what the COVID restrictions are. Obviously, those are getting more lenient in the state, but we also have to go along with the temple and what their rules are. It is looking good, so we are hoping that next month we will be here in person and that we will be gradually returning to having refreshments and tables and get us back to our usual situation. And so please look at eBlasts, look at the Spindrift, go on the website, because that's where we will post all the information about what actually is happening for the next meeting and what we can and what we can't do. We are going to go along now and talk a little bit about some of the committee reports. So I'm going to ask Debbie to come up and talk about what's happening recently at the Moors Healing Garden.
Good morning, everyone. Some of you may already know that Sue Miller, our recent past president, lost her brave battle with pancreatic cancer at the beginning of this month. Sue was diagnosed with cancer at the same time she took on the role of co-president with Sue Kalish. She led our garden club with strength and grace during her co-presidency. As a longtime member of the Healing Garden Committee, I witnessed firsthand what Sue's commitment to the Healing Garden was. Sue received a monetary gift when our committee was in its beginning stage, and she donated a large sum of money to our committee. This generous gift significantly jump-started the renovation of the Healing Garden. These funds offered us the ability to buy new plants and add beautiful containers. An amazing example of Sue's passion for the Healing Garden is after she finished her first chemo treatment at Moores Cancer Center, she then went out to work in the Healing Garden. Also, Sue joined us recently at our fall work party in November. Her passion for the garden was endless. Knowing Sue's commitment to the Healing Garden, a fund has been created in Sue's honor through Moores Cancer Center at UCSD by her family and friends. This fund has been specifically established to support the tiling and maintenance of the fountain in the Healing Garden. It will allow the fountain to be transformed into a beautiful focal point for the patients, their families, and the staff to enjoy. The fountain will be dedicated in Sue's honor when completed. For more information on this fund, please contact Sue Kalish. I will also be posting the link to access the fund that was established in Sue Miller's honor in our next Spindrift. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. It's that time of year when we have to start thinking about membership renewals and thinking about bringing in new members to the Garden Club. We don't know how many new members we will have. We don't know how many of our old members will decide not to come back next year. So everything is a little bit up in the air with this. But Pam Palasal, who is in charge of the membership committee, is going to tell us what's happening with that.
Good morning, everybody. I wish I was a little bit taller so I could see over and look at all of your faces. In this difficult world, it's really wonderful to have something like the Garden Club that we can look forward to getting together and seeing our friends. So I hope you do renew your memberships. I hope you sponsor new members. Everything is online today, so you can renew online. Please remember that to sponsor a new member, you need 2 sponsors. So line up your friends to help you get new people, new blood into our club. I also want to mention that the deadline is May 1st. Hard deadline, no exceptions. And this is because we're all volunteers and we don't need this job to go on for months and months and months, okay? May 1st, hard deadline. I also wanted to thank Sarah Carpenter, our web mistress, for getting the forms online in a very timely manner. And I know, like all of you, I'm looking forward to a great year. Thanks, everybody. Get those forms in.
Thanks, Pam. I'm hoping that Pam is still speaking to Susan and to me by the time the membership application process is over. And we hope that everybody who's here in the sanctuary today and everybody that's watching YouTube at home will get those membership forms in, because we really hope that going forward we can get back to normality and enjoy everything that we've enjoyed in the past. Moving on now, I'll ask Annette to come forward and tell us what's happening with the upcoming Bouquet of Thanks project.
Hi, we'll be doing the Talancia project once again at my home. I'm at 7890 Torrey Lane. I'm in the book. You can look me up, Annette Ritchie-Bice. Sounds like a brew. I have a pint of Bice. Never mind. Anyways, well, I was thinking, hey, it's March 17th, it's St. Patty's Day, so we'll be working with greenery on St. Patty's Day. I have about 10 people signed up. I could use a couple of more, and I want to thank those that have already volunteered. Alice Harmon brought over tags for us, so I want to thank her for that. I can be reached. I could use a couple more by our yearbook, and I will send out a reminder to all the participants. So we're set in stone, rain or shine, masked or unmasked. It's up to you, your comfort zone, 10 to 1 o'clock. Thank you. What's your name? Annette Ritchie-Bice.
Annette Ritchie-Bice. So anybody who wants to join them and wants to volunteer and do the project, please let Annette know, either if you're here today or if you're seeing us on YouTube. Next month, we are hoping to actually be able to have a few tables with sort of a little transition back to normality. And so we're going to ask Susan Oliver to come down and tell us a little bit about the marketplace table that we are hoping to have at the next meeting.
Oh, it's so much prettier up here on the computer. Good morning. I keep thinking about that saying that we maybe all said when we were kids, come out, wherever you are. And I hope that more people will break the habit of watching this online and come and join us. And we're going to try having Marketplace, and we decided it would be a fun time to go back to Sue Kalish's idea of having a member sale where you bring in things that, you know, all the books you've been reading and while you've been sequestered away, crafts you've taken up, vases and containers, frames, gifts that need regifting. Anything that you decide you'd like to share, you can stand and collect the money, and then you can graciously give 20% of that back to the club, which would be wonderful. And I think it'll be fun for everyone and help us get back into a habit of meeting and being together and just sharing not only all the things, but our friendship. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you for helping us try and get back to being normal again. Cheryl Lester can't join us today, but she is the head of the Horticulture Committee, and they will also be having a table at the next meeting. Fingers crossed that we are allowed to go forward with that. Now I'm going to ask Penelope West to come and talk to us about the Tree Planting Project Committee.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah. I want to thank all those who have donated to the tree planting program in memory or in honor of someone. Right now, donations are particularly appreciated because opportunities are emerging for greening and beautifying San Diego, and we want to be able to respond to them. We are currently collaborating with the San Diego Parks Foundation. It's good to collaborate with them because they are able to provide the support for growing trees and look after them better than they can if you just have them on the street. We are going to donate shade and flowering trees to the Linda Vista Community Park, which is one of their projects that they do more than trees, but we will plant their trees for them. Or we'll donate their trees for them. They plant them. And they expect to start planting in March. And a further project with the foundation is in the air for later this year for a neighborhood park in an underserved area of San Diego, which is what we would like to encourage because there's an inequity in terms of tree canopy throughout San Diego County. We have also been asked by Trace Wilson. He is the son of a former member of our club and a landscape architect and planner, for help in making Cliffridge Avenue a full Jacaranda Avenue. Cliffridge Avenue is where the YMCA is located, and opposite that is where the La Jolla Elementary School is. And some years ago, we planted a line of trees outside the YMCA, of jacaranda trees, and he would like us to see if we could donate trees to match that line of trees on the opposite side, in the front of the La Jolla Elementary School. This would be spectacular if we had a line of trees. However, we have a little work to do with the YMCA trees, which have suffered, unfortunately, for reasons we're not quite sure. Anyway, we hope that we will be able to make this vision a reality. So, if there is someone you would like to honor or remember, or if you would simply like to help green San Diego, I hope you'll think of our club's tree planting program. I have bought some of our brochures, and I'll put them outside if any of you would like to take one of our brochures so that you can donate a tree. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, Penelope. Before we go ahead and ask him to introduce our speaker, I just wanted to say that at the end of Liz's talk, we will be raffling off several of her books that she wrote from her trilogy series. And most people, as they came in, I took your names to put them into the raffle bag. But anybody who came in a little bit later, at the end of Liz's talk, if you can pop down and give me your names, I'll put your names in the bag before we actually do the raffle. So we are going to go ahead now and have Kim tell us all about our speaker.
Hi. Elizabeth Sinjan is an acclaimed novelist, historian, genealogist, and gardener with a fascinating family history. Her ancestral home is the famous 260-acre Lydiard Park in Wiltshire, England. Dating from medieval times, the estate was owned by the Sinjans from 1420 until World War II, when it was abandoned. As the international ambassador for the Friends of Lydiard Park, Elizabeth restored the walled garden that was a feature of Lydiard Park in the 17th century. And she has also done extensive research on the Elizabethan medicinal garden in the Tower of London. Today, with original manuscripts, plans, and photography from the Lydiard archives and from her own private collection, Elizabeth will give us a tour of these lost gardens, bringing them to life through the voices of the women who created and tended them. Elizabeth's talk is titled The Lost Gardens of Lydiard Park and the Tower of London, a 500-year-old botanical journey of discovery and restoration. Everyone, please welcome Elizabeth Sinjan.
Good morning, everybody. I'm going to move the mic so I'm not looking like that little guy over the top of a wall, over the top of my screen here. So before we start, let's make sure that you can hear me and you can see the screen. So at the back, can you hear me? Can you see the screen? We're in business. Thank you so much. Let me just get set up here. We have time to get adjusted. And let me start my PowerPoint. We did it. I'm here. You know, this is my first live event in 2 years, and so I am so excited to be here. Thank you. So I'd like to say a real special thanks to Gaina, to Roz for introducing me to the club. Kim, you've been wonderful in coordinating this almost for the last year, and even down to the wire, we weren't sure if it would be live or not. So a very special moment here. I was actually on a book tour in Kansas City when California went into lockdown, and my husband called me at about midnight and said, you might want to try and get the next plane home because things are starting to lock down. So wonderful to be back today. Thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about flowers, a little bit more about curatives and medicinal gardens, and even more about history and the women who tended them. I am not an accomplished gardener. I love flowers, I love gardens, but what piqued my interest in the gardens of both Lydiard Park and the Tower of London were the stories of the women who tended them. So we're going to look at some of the work that they did. I'm going to read you some of their words so you can actually travel with me back into the early 1600s, and we'll travel through time a little bit, and you'll hear through the voices of these women what they were doing in the gardens, and then we'll discover what happened to them. So let me just get my papers set up here so that we're ready. And I've got one more. Good. So thank you. As you heard, I am a writer by profession, and I've actually been very blessed to be able to write a trilogy. And that trilogy is called the Lydiard Chronicles. Now, when I set out to write, I actually only intended to write one book for myself and my family. I never intended it to be published, and I certainly didn't intend to write 3, but you know how life goes. And when I'd finished the first one, my family, my daughter especially, encouraged me to publish it. And so The Lady of the Tower came to life, and to great success. I was very proud that it became a bestseller. And on top of that, I then had to follow up with the story and write the next 2 novels in the series. They are based on a diary that I discovered in actually the basement of Nottingham Castle. And, oops, sorry, that was a good start. Hang on, let me just go back to show. Hang on. There we go. The diary that I discovered in Nottingham Castle was actually written by a woman who lived during the Civil War, and her name was Lucy Sinjan Hutchinson. This is a miniature of her which has just come to light. It's actually in a private collection in England. It's not available anywhere else, and the owners very kindly gave me permission to use it today and to put it on our Lydiard archives. But Lucy was an extraordinary writer. She was one of the first early modern women writers and diarists, and she wrote an extraordinary story about her family. And in particular, she wrote a story about her mother. And that diary itself is now within Nottingham Castle. It's got its own collection. But what she did was write a very fascinating fragment and story about her mother's life. So I'm going to take you on this first little journey to Lucy Sinjan, her mother. So this is Lydiard Park, and this is where Lucy Sinjan was born back in around 1596, we think. Those of you who know architecture are already looking at this and saying, well, that's a Palladian house. That doesn't look like anything from the 15th or 16th century. And you're absolutely right. This is the current front facade of Lydiard House, looking out over its parkland through to the deer park. It's got a wonderful ha-ha, if you know what that is, that separates the deer park from the house so that the deer don't come up. But this is where Lucy Sinjan was born in around 1596. And this is what she would have seen. This is the back of the house. Very, very different. It's a medieval house, and this is the actual facade all the way around the back of the house. And the reason that we have 2 different houses here is that, as usual, we had an earl who ran out of renovation money back in the 1700s. So he got that whole front done. He was using his wife's dowry, and I think perhaps her father said, you can't spend all that money on just the house. So he actually never got around to renovating the back. So the back of the house looks like this currently, and as you can see, it backs right up to a churchyard. And this is the family church that actually abuts the house within this acreage of parkland. But this is what Lucy would have seen when she was growing up there in the early 1600s. And this is a really interesting drawing that was done in the 1700s, mid-1700s, that gives you a sense of that Elizabethan house, very recognizable by the tall chimneys and so on, right next to the church. So this is what she would have seen. But why is that important? Well, when Lucy was about 26 years old, she married a gentleman who then took the post of Lieutenant of the Tower of London. She didn't know that when she married him. He was Victualler of the Navy. They had a nice house in London. Everything was going along swimmingly. But then her husband became very ambitious and spent £3,000 to purchase the office of Governor of the Tower. And what that meant for Lucy is that she had to basically up sticks and move into the Tower of London as the lieutenant's wife. This area that I've outlined, I think you can see the yellow square. This is actually the complex where she lived. So you can see right out in front where that green patch is and where the trees are. That's Tower Green. I don't know if anybody here has been to the Tower. I'm sure you have. So that's exactly the Tower Green, where the execution block is, and the Church of St. Peter ad Vincula is at the back there. In Lucy's time, and we'll get into it a little bit more, that was actually orchards and sort of put into cultivation somewhat, but it's still the green space within the Tower of London now. So these maps give you a better sense of what Lucy was coming into when she arrived in the Tower and what was the sort of purpose of the housing that she lived in and the gardens and the landscape. So if you look at this map on the left-hand side, you'll see again where that yellow square is. And you'll see there the gabled roofs of the house she lived in. Oh, sorry. You'll see the gables of the black and white house on the corner here. Those gables match the gables in the little square. And then right to the right of that, you can see a walled garden and you can see trees. This map was done in 1596. So you can have a sense there that not all of this structure was done. Basically, this area here is the site of where the garden is. You know what, I had to turn my internet on for a second. Let me just turn that off because I don't want us to be hopefully that won't come up again. So Lucy's house when she moved in was this beautiful black gabled, it's still there. For those of you who've been to the Tower, you'll recognize that area. If you look at the plan at the top, that was created probably in the 18th century, and you get a sense there that there were orchards still, trees that were planted there. But again, there was never really any escaping the fact that this was also the site of the executions. And in fact, in Lucy's time, although she cultivated the area and had the fruit trees and the orchards there, there was also a shed in the middle of the garden that was for those who were privileged enough to be executed in private, could actually be executed within the shed. So a very strange environment that she moved into. Here's a closer view of her house and the lawns and orchards that were in front. And again, you can see the block right here, the site of the executions. I was very fortunate when I first was doing my research for the book that I was invited inside the lieutenant's lodgings to actually take a tour of where Lucy lived. This is a picture of her. Again, it's in a private collection of her. And this is actually the view from her front parlor, looking out over the Tower Green and the orchards with St. Peter ad Vincula Church in the background. Just a little note here, this is Lucy, we think it was painted around 1617, with her son Alan. And you'll look at that and you'll go, well, hang on a second, he's wearing a dress. That was very common in those days. Until the boys reached around 6 or 7 years old, they weren't what was called breeched and put into breeches. Children's clothes were basically unisex, so it was easier. They were very expensive clothes. It was easier to take care of the children. So the boys were often dressed, especially in the upper classes, dressed in these beautiful, ornate, what looked like girls' dresses. This is actually a painting by a very famous Dutch artist, Meitens, And he did leave us a little clue. When you look at the original, Alan is actually grasping a pair of red cherries in his little right hand. So I will leave it to your imagination to let you know what those two little cherries signified, so that you knew it was a boy. So let's talk about Lucy's garden and Lucy's role at the tower. She was definitely expected to work at the tower. Not only was she in charge of raising her own family and the well-being of her husband, but she was also expected to tend the prisoners and look after them. And I'm just looking, I thought I had one more. I think in the shuffle for all the technology, one of my handouts got missed. But there was very much a point that Lucy was expected to tend to the prisoners. And there's a lovely quote from her daughter which says that she looked after them with the care of a mother. She made sure that they had curatives, that she nursed them when they were ill, and that she took care of them, served them broths, and basically looked out for them personally to make sure that none of them suffered any more than they had to while they were there. And what that meant was that basically Lucy effectively cultivated an entire garden within the Tower of London. And it was located right between the Bloody Tower, which actually used to be called the Garden Tower, and her house. And she basically had the plot of land there, and that was where she put her entire medicinal garden. The Victorians built over it, and unfortunately we can't go in and knock down, much as some of us would like to, the Victorian housing. But recently the tower did put in place a tribute to Lucy and her garden there. And they've stocked these wonderful little flower boxes of the representational herbs that she would have had to use as the curatives. The Bloody Tower is famous for many of its inhabitants, and of course it sits right up the hill from Traitor's Gate. So I think, again, if you start thinking about what it was like for her in those times, on the one hand, she's trying to create this garden, have her curatives there, and at the other time there's prisoners being ferried in and people basically having their last stay on earth in the Bloody Tower or the Garden Tower. By the way, the tower changed its name to the Bloody Tower just before Lucy moved in. She would have known it perhaps by both names, but it was renamed the Bloody Tower because of the prisoner that was there who committed suicide. In those days, that was a dreadful crime against God, and so they renamed it Bloody Tower at that time. So let's talk a little bit more about what Lucy was doing in the tower. She had two very famous prisoners who she was looking after while she was there. Ensconced in the Bloody Tower was Sir Walter Raleigh, and then just up the road from him was what was called the Wizard Earl, Sir Henry Percy. Now these guys just loved to make experiments. They were alchemists. They loved to think about botanicals and curatives and so on. So much so that we have on record that Lucy actually donated her hen house in her garden to Sir Walter Raleigh to create his alchemy experiments. She really benefited from his knowledge. Coming back from the New World, he brought back some really new, interesting learnings, including sassafras, for example. But I think what she was also fascinated with was some of the curatives and experiments that he was doing with his alchemy. And I just have this wonderful vision of her sort of standing at the kitchen window doing the washing up, and there's, Sir Walter Raleigh out there banging away in her hen house, little explosions going off, smoke coming out of the windows, because it truly was that hands-on, and she was out there working with him. The Wizard Earl was another alchemist. He was also a great botanist, and he very much contributed to some of the recipes and so on. And we'll talk about some of their recipes and the ingredients that Lucy was growing in just a minute. I'm going to read you a couple of extracts for some of the recipes that Lucy created, and probably in conjunction with Raleigh. Raleigh, again, was a keen botanist and spent his last years in the Tower of London before he was executed, working very closely with Lucy in the garden and creating these fantastic curatives and medicines and growing all his plants to support that. And he actually had his wife, Bess Throckmorton, would come in and visit him because he was a pretty special prisoner. He had, he was allowed to have guests. He lived in nice conditions. But she would come in and help create the curatives with him. Because again, if you think back to those times, they were pretty much hoping that anything would cure anything. I mean, there was some science behind it, but there was we're sort of between superstition and science in that century. So he was definitely on call for his recipes. One of the things that he believed in, obviously, it was rosemary was a very strong curative, and it was one that was used widely in those times. And in fact, one of the recipes that Lucy and Sir Walter Raleigh, which actually in my book I feature all their recipes as headings to the chapters, one of the things that she advised was to place rosemary under your pillow to help you remember your dreams and to keep away nightmares and other unwanted nighttime visitations. Rosemary can be carried or worn by the bride to symbolize love and loyalty. If a bride and groom plant a rosemary bush together on their wedding day, they can divine the family's fortune, and a gift of rosemary is a token of fidelity. It's also a token of remembrance, and that was another part of the herb that I used in my writing. One of the things that we have at Lydiard, which we really value immensely, is a 17th century recipe book that contains nothing but pretty much curatives and herbal remedies. And one of the things that I find fascinating, it was written, and we're going to talk about it more in a minute, it was written by Lucy's niece, but it contains recipes within that definitely came from Lucy and from Sir Walter Raleigh, which to me, again, just reinforces how we, over the years, we switch recipes, right? Within the family, we talk about things that are really important, and we share those curatives or things that really work or great recipes that we're proud of. So it was really lovely to see echoes of Lucy's time in the Tower of London reproduced in her niece's recipe book, which she wrote at Lydiard about 50 years later. I'm going to give you, if you want to pause here for a second and just listen, I'm going to read a couple of these remedies to you and talk a little bit about some of the herbs that they were using. And you'll start to recognize these. And again, I think about what their times were like. We've just been through, a pandemic. We've struggled to think about how do we keep ourselves safe? How do we get a vaccination? They didn't have any of those things when the plague arrived. And Lucy lived through several plagues during her lifetime. And here's her recipe for an antidote for the plague. Now, of course, today we know there's no antidote for the plague. There wasn't then. But here's what she recommended that we do. Antidote for the plague. Take conserve of wood sorrel and a scruple of saffron, together with the syrup of the juice of citrons, as much as will make an electuary. Take with a quantity of a large nutmeg every morning. A scruple of saffron, that's a little tiny screwed up piece of paper, for those of you who are English and remember Smith's crisps in the old days, that little blue twist of salt that used to come separately with your chips or your crisps, that's a scruple. And an electuary is basically a mixture of herbs. I think this is about the only recipe that she has that doesn't contain alcohol, so otherwise they all did, which obviously was a great help. But I think it's interesting that sometimes things like nutmeg, which would have been very expensive and quite rare in those days, obviously was something that they thought was important to add into the recipes. Another recipe that we find, which I thought was also interesting, which probably came from Lucy and some of the plantings that she was doing in the tower. This is for heart palpitations. And it says, for the palpitations of the heart, take 1.5 ounces of juniper wood, angelica roots, and galingale root, each 2 drams, and 1/2 citron and orange peel, each 3 drams. Juniper berries, 1.5 ounces, St.John's wort flowers, 2 scruples, Corinths bruised, 2.5 ounces. Put these into a cup of white wine and let them infuse some time. Then drink a wine glass every morning and an hour after dinner and supper, the same quantity. Well, if that doesn't make you mellow, I don't know what will, but... And then, another one here, and I could read these all day to you, and I won't because there's more to talk about, but for those who are near distraction with vapors and cannot sleep, well, I think we've all been through that the last 2 years. Boil as much hemp seed bruised as oatmeal in water gruel. Take it at night, it causeth sleep. So a little hemp and oatmeal. So again, as all of these recipes in the recipe book itself is digitized and is available on the Lydiard archives. And it's free access. So if you are interested in these recipes and the history behind them, do go and visit. The book itself is absolutely beautiful, even to the point that you can see her name is written large in it. She's got a handy little table of apothecary measurements and so on. So a great transition then from Lucy in the tower and then over to Lady Joanna. So we'll move into Lydiard Park now, and Lydiard Park continued to thrive. It was the Sinjan family seat, country seat. We had a house, an estate up in London as well, in Battersea. But Lydiard Park was used certainly during the summer for the children to come and breathe fresh air. It supplied all of the fruits, vegetables, livestock to the Battersea house in London. And it was also where people were sent to recover if they had fallen ill. So it was a sort of very much a respite for everything. And then this is Lady Joanna Sinjan. This is Lucy's niece, and she is the one who's really accredited with establishing the gardens at Lydiard Park and really writing the recipe book. And we have a wonderful trove of her letters that still exist, where she's sending instructions back for all kinds of things that she wanted delivered up to the London house, grown in the garden, just all kinds of wonderful notes. These are 3 lovely pictures that I love of her as a very young woman when she was a new bride, in the center when she was sort of coming into her own, and then in her later years when she was writing her recipe book and really sort of the chatelaine of the estate. I really love the picture of her, because I'm such a dog lover, with her spaniel. I can just imagine her walking around the gardens, taking notes, dogs at her heels, doing what we do. And as a historian and a writer and someone who loves to be out in these gardens and outside, I love to think of the women who have lived before and done these kind of things. Her recipes are funny at times. This particular one Yeah, this is the one I really enjoy. It's a curative for a mad dog or a mad husband. You could use it equally between the two of them. So I have tried it, don't tell him, but but that's a wonderful one. And then she also has a letter where she's instructing the steward at Lydiard Park to set up a maypole for the villagers and to also make sure that they have plenty of mead and plenty of food to enjoy May Day and their May Day celebrations. So she was very much in touch, although she was a lady of the court. They were loyal subjects of King Charles II. They entertained him at their Battersea house, but she always maintained her love of the land and spent her time at Lydiard when she could. This is how the estate looked in 1703. This is an extent map that we have. Again, very different. You can see that whole Palladian front doesn't exist yet. If I can just move my mouse around here. A very big service wing that runs down the side, and a certain amount of formal gardens that are laid out in front of the house. What's tantalizing here is this area, and these are all Lady Joanna's herb, flower, vegetable gardens. And we're just seeing the edge of the original gardens that she had. Last year we commissioned an artist to do an impression of what the house looked like with Lady Joanna's gardens intact and a much better sense of how formal the gardens were and how they were laid out. Where these gardens are, and we'll look at a picture in just a minute, is now parkland. They are lost and continue to be lost. When we have a very dry summer, we can see the lines underneath the lawns, as you know, that those sometimes burn through. But we do have the records of many of her plantings and the contents of the gardens. And let me just read a little bit to you here so you can get a sense of what she had in her gardens. So this is correspondence between Lady Joanna and her steward, Thomas Hardyman. This is just a summary of what they were talking about and the produce and the things that were grown there. So the produce included turkeys, geese, chickens, swans, wild duck, rabbits, pork, bacon and cattle, some driven on the hoof. So if you think going that's from Wiltshire up to London, that's a significant journey to actually drive your cattle up, but they would do that so they could slaughter them fresh when they got to Battersea. Butter, brawn, and cheese. Partridges, which had been turned out into the orchard, were also in demand. And she also requested rabbits from Lydiard's hives. We are, what does she say here? We're stocking the warrens for Battersea. As far as the plantings, and she was on a continual program of flowers and vegetables, she would ask for oranges, citrons, and lemons for making citron water, oak bud, and red roses, and conserve of red roses were also made at Lydiard. And she had all kinds of things like vegetables we would recognize, peas, asparagus, skirrets, which is a form of carrot, and the lists just go on and on. And again, you're welcome to go and visit these on the archives. It's just fascinating to see all the materials that she was planting and managing. A little bit more about her recipe book here. I think we covered this, but again, it's just fascinating to go through and look at all of the different handwriting that she did. You can see it's done over the years, recipes that she brought from different people. And here's some of her inspiration. So there's this exquisite painted window at Lydiard House. It was painted in 1615, and it contains this gorgeous array of flowers and mythical beasts and so on. And we think that the artist who was based at Lydiard when he created the sketches for this was probably picking up direct flowers that were currently grown at Lydiard. So you'll recognize, lilies or foxgloves, daisies, roses, and so on. And this current window, which still exists, was probably inspiration and drew from the gardens and the plantings that were at Lydiard House at the time. So we could start thinking about what the gardens looked like. And so just as we looked at what was recreated at the Tower of London, we also looked at what could we recreate at Lydiard Park. And although we have not been able to excavate those large terraces where Lady Joanna's underground garden still exists, we were able to recreate in the 17th century walled garden plantings and a garden that absolutely replicates the work that she did. And again, it's all based around plants that we knew from her lists, from what she ordered. And I'm going to go into the archaeology of it in just a moment. But just think about that we were able to piece together from the lists, from the painted window, and from her letters, what was stocked in the garden at the time, because the garden, unfortunately, had become lost. We're going to move now into the 1750s, my last Lady of Lydiard that I'll be talking about, and then we'll talk a little bit about the restorations that we've done, and then we can have some questions and answers. But by now, the Lydiard Park had become that beautiful Palladian fronted park. It had an ornamental lake. Those are the kind of things, of course, that were so popular in landscaping in the 1700s, 1800s. And this whole area of greenery that you see to the left of the screen is where Lady Joanna's gardens and terraces exist. But we're going to talk a little bit now, for a few minutes, about the third Lady of Lydiard. And her name is Lady Diana Spencer. And she was the first Lady Di. She was Viscountess Bolingbroke, and she lived at Lydiard from 1757 to 1768. She married the first Viscount on a whim. He proposed to her when they were out at a picnic, and she sort of said, why not? They were part of the fast set and thought that would be really funny, and didn't really think it through properly. And he was an absolute ghastly man, and by the time they'd actually settled down in married life at Lydiard, he was unfaithful, he kept a mistress, he was not a good man at all. And she was actually able to get a divorce, which was very rare in those times, by an act of parliament. But what she was an accomplished artist. But again, I think one of the things, this portrait of her is so beautiful, and I think you can absolutely see the family resemblance to her great-great-great-granddaughter, which is extraordinary. When you go into Lady Diana Spencer's room at Lydiard, we have her whole boudoir and dressing room recreated. When you see the picture of her, it gives you quite a start for a moment to see the family likeness. So this is just a little bit of an extract of her boudoir. The painted window is actually incorporated into her room. And when she got her divorce, she had to truly make some money, which in those days was rare, but her blackguard of a husband had gone through all of her money. She got the divorce, but she was an incredibly talented artist. And so she took inspiration from the gardens at Lydiard and from the painted window again, and started creating these beautiful pieces of art. And again, you can start to see, as you can see at the bottom left here, images of the flowers that are Lydiard incorporated into her artwork. And she was commissioned by Wedgwood to do some of the very, very first designs, floral designs for Wedgwood. And those designs still exist in the archives. And we have some of the panels and so on at Lydiard. Just some more of her artwork and her designs there. They're exquisite. She also painted portraits and so on. But, she had quite a happy ending, although the marriage was absolutely awful. And in fact, she married another chap that was equally awful. She didn't have good taste in men. But she did become a very well-known artist. and painted these exquisite florals again that inspired the gardens and took inspiration from the gardens. So where's Lydia today? I'm going to talk a little bit now, and just a few more minutes, tell you the story of where we are, where we've been, and where we've come. This is actually, it's funny, this is one of the gates into the existing walled garden. This is the 17th century walled garden that it currently exists at Lydiard. And I'm laughing because I was standing there when I was back in September, and there's a little tiny gap under this gate, and someone had stuffed a towel there, and I'm thinking, why have you stuffed a towel under the gate? Well, they actually had a family of blind hedgehogs had taken up residency in the walled garden, and they had to stuff the towel there every day to stop them from escaping. So it's a beautiful little natural area too. This is Lydiard House as it was back right at the turn of the 20th century. This is the very last Lady Bolingbroke, living in genteel shabbiness. The house is crumbling around her. That Lady Di's husband had gambled away all the money. The house is starting to fall into rack and ruin. But even so, she kept going with her landscaping and her flowers. And this is actually a wonderful example of Victorian carpet bedding. I mean, it's just very typical. So goodness knows what the rest of the park looked like. It was probably all falling apart around her, but she was able to maintain that one little illusion of grandeur and have tea out in front of her crumbling mansion. And today, it's all been restored. The Victorian garden has gone because it's been restored back to its natural parklands. The house has been saved. I'll talk about that in a second. And the gardens are all under restoration or have been restored. It's the same with the back of the house. By 1943, the house was pretty much derelict. World War II, of course, really impacted it. And the house in Parkland actually became the UK base for the 101st Airborne Division. And they actually set up tents in the parkland. They built a temporary town and hospital there. But as a result, of course, the family by now had completely lost all of their money, bankrupt and so on. And the house was really, slated for demolition. That's what happened to so many of England's country homes after the war. But we were really, really fortunate. Swindon Borough Council had a very, very visionary town councillor, and he stepped in and he bought the house and 260 acres of parkland from the Sinjans and bought it for the council to hold it and preserve it. So we're really fortunate because I think it would not exist otherwise. And this is that picture that you saw earlier of the house and how it's now been restored. And so what of the gardens? What is left and what came of this? This is an aerial view of Lydiard Park as it was around the year 2000, 2002. And it looks beautiful, doesn't it? It's that typical lush, gorgeous, green English country house and garden and park. But you'll notice, to the bottom right, there's this massive walled area. You can see the wall running all the way through it, and then what frankly looks like a cricket ground in the center of it. And to the far top left of the screen, you'll see a wooded area. Well, that was the ornamental lake. That was that beautiful lake that you saw a picture of. By the early 2000s, it had completely drained and was simply left to overgrow. So we were very fortunate that we actually applied for a grant from the British Lottery, and they gave us a £5 million grant to restore the gardens as much as we could, to restore the lake, and to really bring Lady Joanna's, Lady Di's gardens back to life. So we started with the excavators and dug out the entire lake, fixed the dam walls, put back all of the facilities around. There was a bathhouse, there was a little jetty, there was a little boathouse. And today the lake looks like this. It's an extraordinary, beautiful lake for wildlife and just a real haven, not just for the house, but for all the people of the area who come and enjoy it for free access. What intrigues me is, again, those green lawns there. Those are Lady Joanna's terraced gardens. So my dream is to actually get another grant and see if we can do the archaeology and excavate those, because it would be fascinating to see. The walled garden. So this is that big green area that you saw. That had been completely left to rack and ruin. All the plantings had disappeared. This was planted originally in the 17th and 18th century, and again, by the time the house went into dereliction, the garden had gone. So part of the grant that we got was to actually restore the walled garden to its original form. And when we started to do the restoration, and I was really lucky because I was able to do some of the digging there and part of the restoration, we didn't know what we would find. We'd done some geological surveys, we'd done some underground to see what was there. And as we started to dig, we started to see the old garden emerge from it. It was about 9 inches down, and as we started to excavate, we found all kinds of things. We found medieval pottery. We found an entire pig, which was extraordinary. I mean, the whole pig skeleton that had been preserved. But most importantly, we found the entire layout of the old garden. We found the original well. We found plinths where they'd had ornamental statues and urns. So it was an incredibly rewarding project to actually get in there and restore the whole garden. And there's something about this photograph which really makes my heart warm. If you look at the far right, there's a little spaniel that somehow got in the picture. And I like to think that might have been a little sign from Lady Joanna, if you remember that painting of her with her spaniel, that she approved of what we were doing. And here's the walled garden today. It's glorious. It's, again, a place that people can walk around. There's benches you can sit and enjoy. There's guided tours of the garden and so on. But it's just so wonderful just to see, it come back to life for something that was almost lost completely. So I think that sort of ends my talk. I actually said it's actually the lost and found gardens, right? It's not just the lost gardens, because we do keep finding things every day, both at the tower and at Lydiard. So I would encourage you, if any of you ever have a trip planned to England, we're only about an hour and a half by train from Paddington. It's a quick shot down. And we'd love to give you a tour, extend an invitation to visit anytime. I have docents there that would be loved to show you around. But thank you. That's my talk. Does anybody have any questions or anything they'd like to comment on? You good? All right, let's do the fun stuff. Should we do the prizes?
First of all, if anybody came in after I took everybody's name for the raffle, if you want to come down and write your name, we'll include you in the bag before we draw. While we're doing that, we want to thank Liz for her wonderful talk. That was just delightful.
Well, while we're doing that, I could always read you some more recipes. Do that. There's a couple more. They use brandy, wine, hippocras, whatever alcohol they could get their hands on. I think it was the fix-all for everything. But they also used a lot of really interesting apothecary items too. And if you look at, for instance, Sir Walter Raleigh had a recipe for Gilbert's water, which is a cordial, that appears in Lady Joanna's cookbook, which is really recipe book, which is fascinating. But not only does it contain, herbs and flowers that we would recognize, it also includes things like stag's heart and unicorn horn and the black tips of crab claws gathered by moonlight and things like that. So these wonderful, again, you're right on the crossroads of science and superstition in that century. Yes? No, yes, so the lady, I'm sorry, I can't quite see her name from here, asked my life. So I did not grow up in Lydiard, but I've been visiting Lydiard since I was about 5 years old. So it's very my special place. As I say, the Sinjan family basically left in 1943. But I will say one funny story. I was there, we restored some paintings, and I was there with my brother, and we were walking through the house to go see a new painting that had been hung, and it was a 17th century Sinjan. And we walked in and we both went, oh my goodness, and it was the spitting image of our Uncle Brian. And it's like, what's he doing, dressed up in that wonderful gear? So there was still a family resemblance. I won't look. I promise I won't look. Let me come and hear you down front. After I'd written, actually I can do it right here. After I'd written the Lydia Chronicles, I thought, that's it. Sorry about that. Yes, after I'd written the Lydia Chronicles, I thought, oh, that's it. I'm really, done. And then one day I thought, I really do miss writing, and I miss the research. And at the Lydiard archives, we have this extraordinary family tree, which is all digitized, stretching back to around 1100 of the Sinjan family. And I was just playing around, and I thought, I wonder what would happen if I put my own name in. So I put in Elizabeth Sinjan, and about half a dozen Elizabeths came up, and I went, oh, that's fun. And I went, oh, by date, let me have a look and see who might be interesting. So I went all the way back to an Elizabeth Sinjan who was born in 1450 at Lydiard. And I thought, oh, let me find out more about her. So I clicked on her and I did some research. And it turns out that she was the godmother to one of the princes in the tower. And I thought, oh, that's an interesting story right there. And so I started following her thread and following the story. And it took me all the way to Bolton Castle, which those of you who are Yorkshire lovers will know, which is what this image is of, and that's where she lived. So yes, my newest book, which will be out in the spring, hopefully, is called The Godmother's Secret, and it's about what really happened to the princes in the tower, as told by Elizabeth Sinjan, their godmother. I hope.
Okay, so now we're going to have Liz pick out a name, or pick out 3 names. We have 3 books.
All right, thank you.
Don't look.
I'm not
Yes.
looking.
Okay. You want to? Okay.
Is that good?
Yeah. Keep going.
I'm really good at this, aren't I? Not looking back.
One more. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Okay. You want to read those out?
I do.
Can you see them?
Yes, so I have Kathy Peterson. Yay, thank you, Kathy. And Suzanne Ward. Yes. And Nan Kaufman. Lovely, thank you.
If you want to come up and choose a book, that would be great.
And I can sign them too, if you like.
That would be lovely.
Yes.
Liz is going to sign them for you as well. She wasn't looking. She really wasn't looking. No, I think there's one of each from the trilogy, I think. Can read them. And that is the end of our meeting for today. Thank you all for being here in person. We'll see you next month, we hope. Susan, you have a question? Yes, they are. Yes.